Fraud and forensics. Thanks, Aaron. The next slide. I want to take you through a very typical and real case study in Victorian Government, which should resonate with all of you, whether you're state or local government. And this was through an RFQ process. RSM was selected and engaged by this Victorian government entity, their integrity team, to conduct a multi-part fraud and corruption assessment to refresh and update the organisation's fraud and corruption control system or framework. So some of the issues and challenges from their perspective was, and this might resonate with you, that there was a concern related to not knowing what they don't know regarding fraud, corruption and integrity risks, because they hadn't done a refresh of the risk assessment for quite a while. Also, policies, procedures and documented practices had not been reviewed in recent time. So therefore that leaves them slightly exposed to potential updates in legislation that haven't been covered, or better practices, which is the next point on upgrading to a better practice benchmark, which was or included the Australian standard AS 8001, which was updated in 2021 on fraud and corruption control. Also, having the updated fraud and corruption control framework live in the culture by awareness training by all employees and its operationalisation of updates. So that's what the organisation wanted. And also the last point was their issues and challenges were ensuring compliance with Victorian Government expectations from the Independent Broad-Based Anti-Corruption Commission, Victorian Auditor General's Office, Department of Treasury and Finance, ministerial directions and onwards. So what we did for the client and cooperatively agreed to from the RFQ was a comprehensive fraud and corruption risk assessment refresh to look at their particular government industry sector type, what fraud and corruption risks are most relevant. Are they represented on the risk register? If not, to refresh that. And of course, look at the controls I make an itinerary and diarise the controls, if you like, or document them. And then a residual risk assessment and leading to potential management action plans for high-rated risks. Benchmark gap analysis against the Australian standard 8001 to identify enhancements or improvement opportunities. Advice on best practice operating model and governance considerations, including a management implementation action plan or roadmap to allow the organisation to continue with those key changes. Revise and enhance each fraud and corruption control relevant policy and procedure, including their public interest disclosure policy procedure. And then we also, at the end of the engagement, conducted 25 interactive on MS Teams fraud and corruption control employee awareness training sessions to over 500 employees, which was a great way to, it's not in person, so it's not labour intensive in that sense. Anyone could dial in once registered into those different sessions, and MS Teams or a similar video conference portal is a great way for interactive learning. Not on this occasion, but on other assignments for clients in the Victorian Government sector, we've done fraud, bribery and corruption employee awareness surveys, because it's a very tangible way to actually reach out to the whole population of employees to ask them different things, including a question of, have you ever been asked or seen anything, asked to do anything improper or seen anything improper? And if the answer is yes, please elaborate. And then if people are willing to give their details to be contacted, we can then follow up with them. Otherwise, it's anonymous. And the information may be enough for the client to then pursue to harden its internal controls environment or conduct an investigation, which we have offered to assist and done on many occasions for Victorian Government. So the solutions, We developed and delivered the scope suite of services in a phased approach for an operationalisation of their fraud and corrupt control system or framework. We did work cooperatively with an enthusiastic and well-versed integrity team. And we always like to share better practices, and clients will say, well, I don't quite understand this, or where have you got this from, or what's better practice in this? We're happy to share that so that the client can then continue on, and it might assist with the expertise they're developing internally. And also, that helps with the continuing implementation of their roadmap going forward. We also assisted with their audit and risk committee questions and answers that they had. Thanks, Aaron. Next slide, please. So I recently wrote an article which is published on our RSM website, and please don't hesitate to reach out to me either on email or phone. You'll see my contact details on the website, or link in with me in LinkedIn. I very regularly post a WTF What the Fraud post. There's one client who says to me, he wakes up every morning and is disappointed if there's not a WTF there. Initially, he thought he was being scammed, but then he realised it was my regular update. So we wrote this article on anti-fraud and forensic hacks, just basic tips you can use in your own business immediately. And it does overlap with what I've just discussed with that case study. So it's know your fraud risks. Have a look at your fraud and corruption risk assessment. Has it been updated? Has it been refreshed? If it hasn't for a few years, it's timely to do that. And there will be some changes, modifications and amendments, especially the intelligence you can gather from a lot of the IBAC or Ombudsman Victoria reports that come out on investigations that are great lessons learned for other government entities. Use the existing standards as shortcuts. Don't tell anyone, but you don't need a consultant. You can do this yourself if you want, but we often get called to say, we've got the standard, we know what to do, but we just don't have the resources to do it. But use the Australian standard AS8001 2021. There's now a global standard as well, but most, and IBAC, VARGO, DTF, all espouse the Australian standard as a better practice standard. Activate your whistleblower program. So public interest disclosure legislation is your legislation. Fraud is detected by a tip-off or someone having the courage to speak up as a whistleblower or a public interest disclosure in 48% of fraud matters. So, or 48% of fraud is detected that way. So make sure that that program is operating properly, whether that's internally or a mixture of external and internal with your public interest disclosure coordinators, and potentially an outsourced provider, or just checking that it's all activated. People are aware of it, they have confidence in it and can report. If you haven't had a report for many years, I would suggest it's worth a look at, because there's probably some issue why. Watch the red flags. Fraud often presents as a combination of smaller behavioural signs, but certainly watch those red flags for, refusal to take leave, because often it's overrepresented in the fraud investigations we do, where people don't take leave because if they do, their fraud will be uncovered. Next slide, please, Aaron. Thank you. So the next few points there is data analytics isn't just for big business. You have a wealth of data that you can tap into, whether it's internally doing that or getting the assistance from someone like RSM and our data analytics team to do that, to see what problems there are, whether it's fraud or error or it's inefficiency that can be improved upon. Conduct periodic screening of employees, especially in high-risk area, as well as suppliers. There's a lot of free, excellent government databases that can be used to check the bona fides of vendors and employees. Embed forensic thinking into your culture. And remember, the behaviour you walk past is the behaviour you endorse. So it's that professional skepticism. And the last one is don't wait until something goes wrong. If you suspect something is not right, whether it's unexplained losses, irregular vendor behaviour, or an overproductive employee, act and have a look and see if you've got that forensic mindset, professional skepticism to then have predication to commence an investigation, whether it's internally run or run independently by someone like ourselves.